Radio Berlin, nightly.
Himmler puts the Mufti in charge of all Arabic broadcasting from Berlin. Over the airwaves, al-Husseini repeatedly calls for another Arab uprising against the British. He also rails against the Jews, inciting Arabs to, quote, "kill the Jews wherever you find them."
In all of his speeches afterwards, he would always explain there are three big enemies: the British, the Americans, and the Jews. He would depict America as the big enemy of the Arabs.
The Mufti hated Jews, he hated Zionism. His goal was to destroy the Jews, kill them before they were allowed to immigrate.
In 1943, the Grand Mufti learns of plans by Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria, countries allied to Germany, to let thousands of Jews leave for the safety of Palestine. Through his influence with Himmler and von Ribbentrop, the Mufti immediately has the programs canceled. Among the planned emigrants are 4,000 children. Their fate in Nazi-controlled Europe is almost certain death. In the last 4 years of war, Germany has suffered enormous casualties on the battlefield. The Reich is desperate for fighting men. Heinrich Himmler begins recruiting Muslims from the Balkans with the enthusiastic help of the Grand Mufti, Amin al-Husseini. The Mufti helps raise the Bosnian Muslim 13th SS Division Hansjar, along with other units of what the Mufti calls his Arab Legion. Altogether, the Grand Mufti helps recruit 30,000 men for the Nazi war machine. Ironically, in Nazi racial theory, Arabs are seen as inferior racial stock and not eligible for SS membership. Himmler treats foreign SS units with contempt as second-class citizens. But after an extensive physical exam for the Mufti, he makes an exception. For this, he has Hitler's approval.
The personal physician of the Grand Mufti evaluated the Grand Mufti, and he said he is not an Arab. He's a Caucasian, almost an Aryan. So we can expect that he will be a really reliable ally for us.
The SS Division Hansjar is deployed hunting down underground resistors in Yugoslavia and acts as an internal security force in Hungary. The division is responsible for a series of atrocities against partisans and Jews. In April 1945, as Allied troops fight their way through Germany in the last battles of the war in Europe, the story of the Mufti's Muslim regiments takes one final twist. As the cataclysmic battle for Berlin rages around Hitler's bunker, among the Nazi troops making their last suicidal stand are 100 men of the Mufti's Arab Legion. With the Allied victory, the war is over. But the influence of Nazi Germany on the Middle East is far from over. In Iraq, the Grand Mufti's legacy will fan the flames of a new and potent force, one that will mold a young Arab nationalist into a cunning and brutal dictator. After the war in Europe ends, in 1945, the Allies set up the Nuremberg war crimes trials to bring to justice the perpetrators of wartime atrocities. One by one, the surviving senior Nazis are convicted of crimes against humanity. The Grand Mufti, Amin al-Husseini, is denounced for war crimes committed by his Bosnian SS squads in Yugoslavia. But he will never sit in the Nuremberg dock. And the reason?
Oil. The Allies needed to keep the confidence and to keep the support of the restive and fomenting Arab communities in the Middle East.
The Grand Mufti escapes justice, finding refuge in Egypt. There he resumes his activities and goes on to become one of the most influential leaders in the Arab world for the next 20 years. In the years following the Iraqi uprising, the British keep a firm grip on Iraq. The monarchy is restored, and the young King Faisal has even been to school in England. So confident are the British that some of those who took part in the coup of 1941 are released from prison. Among them is Saddam Hussein's uncle Khairallah Talfah. Like many of his fellow pro-German rebels, Talfah faces a difficult future. Banned from rejoining the Iraqi army, he becomes a village school teacher in Tikrit, his tribal home. It is a modest occupation, but to many young Iraqis, Talfah is a hero. One of his deepest admirers is his young nephew, Saddam Hussein.
Saddam was basically orphaned at a very young age, probably when he was 2 or 3. He was born into a very poor family. So he was basically sent off to live with his uncle Khairallah, who lived in Tikrit, and it was through Khairallah that eventually Saddam got some semblance of an education.
Because Saddam didn't start school until he was 11, he was behind his classmates in reading and writing. He was mercilessly teased and bullied.
The one thing Saddam was good at was using his fists, and so he defended his family honor by beating people up.
The young Saddam Hussein worships his uncle, whom he sees as a freedom fighter for the Arab cause. In the coming years, Saddam will absorb from Khairallah Talfah a hatred of the British and the Jews, and a deep admiration for fascism.
This was the kind of man that Saddam Hussein was intimately connected with in the 1940s and 50s. A man who had no love for the British, who hated the monarchy. It's not really surprising that Saddam Hussein gravitates towards the Baath Party.
Khairallah Talfah writes a pamphlet voicing his anger at being excluded from the army and from politics. It is entitled, "Three Whom God Should Not Have Created: Persians, Jews, and Flies." In it, Talfah vents his hatred of Jews, Iranians, and Kurds, and dreams of uniting the Arab world. In the aftermath of the war, the situation in the Middle East is changing fast. Thousands of Jews who have survived the Nazi campaign of extermination flee to Palestine. The British try to prevent them from settling, but the Jewish underground fights back. The Jewish resistance group Irgun blows up the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, the main British headquarters. 91 people are killed in the attack. As Palestine's Jewish population soars, tensions between Arabs and Jews reach fever pitch. Each side launches brutal attacks on the other. With Palestine spiraling into civil war, the British decide they can no longer remain. In November 1947, the United Nations announces that Palestine is to be partitioned into 2 states, one Jewish, one Arab. While the Jewish population is jubilant at the news of independence, the Arabs refuse to accept the partition plan. Bitter fighting breaks out between heavily armed Jewish and Arab militias. As the British pull out their military forces as part of the UN agreement, troops from Egypt, Syria, Jordan,